By following the rules in the previous lecture, your chances of getting the correct exposure varies according to the subject matter. The camera metering systems have been designed for the amateur photographer who uses a camera on weekends in sunny locations with nice green grass and trees, blue skies, white clouds. Generally, the photographic process does not involve anything more complicated than snapshot photography. Metering is how your camera determines what the correct shutter speed and aperture should be, depending on the amount of light that goes into the camera and the sensitivity of the sensor. Camera meters work great when the scene is lit evenly. However, it gets problematic and challenging for light meters to determine the exposure where there are objects with different light levels and different intensities. So, for example, if you're taking a picture of a blue sky with no clouds, the image will be correctly exposed because there's just one light level to deal with. The job gets a little harder if you add a few clouds into the image. The meter now needs to evaluate the brightness of the clouds versus the brightness of the sky and try to determine the optimal exposure. Now, as a result, the camera meter might brighten up the sky a little bit in order to properly expose the white clouds. Otherwise, the clouds would look too white or overexposed. Now, what would happen if you added a mountain into the scene? Now, the camera meter would see that there is a large object that is much darker compared to the clouds and sky, and it would try to come up with something in the middle so that the mountain is properly exposed as well. If your intent is to take photographic images that are beyond those snapshot images, then exposure control will definitely help you succeed with that. First, you have to decide, if the option is available to you, which metering pattern will best suit your needs. Now, there are three main types, and they all see the environment a little differently. Not one metering pattern is perfect for all situations, though most photographers will select the evaluative metering as it is considered the best all-around choice for most situations. Evaluative light metering is a refined metering response. It covers most or all of the overall viewfinder image area with a series of metering compartments. Now, each of these cells is further broken down into smaller subcells in order to analyze lighting within that area. Now, using the ability to analyze areas within cells and averaging those results along with all of the other cells allows for a much more refined exposure control for the bright to dark contrast range in a scene. On some of the newer cameras, using evaluative metering systems, the meters are actually looking for extra bright or extra dark areas of the image. Now, since these areas fall outside the contrast range of normal exposure, that portion, the extra bright or extra dark, is canceled out of the overall exposure calculations. The idea is that these areas, because they're overly bright or dark, would end up tainting the final results. Now, unfortunately, since the camera doesn't know what it is that it's actually looking at, the meter could end up canceling the very subject that you're trying to expose in the first place. So, for example, a bright sun in a sunset. Now, while these systems are certainly being refined with each new camera model, the net result at this point is that the meter doesn't know what it's looking at, and therefore it can't always be trusted to always make a proper determination as to how to expose the scene that you're looking at. Further adjustments of the metered values might be necessary in order to correct exposure for the subject. Now, evaluative metering is the metering pattern of choice for most photographers. It is very good at determining proper exposure in the majority of situations. Now, center-weighted metering is one of the more common styles of light meters that's built into cameras today. Approximately about 75% of the metering area is directed towards the center of the image, while only 25% is distributed around the outside of the zone of center-weighted metering. Using the whole frame for determining the correct exposure isn't always a desirable ideal. So what if you're trying to take a headshot of a person with a sun behind them? This is a situation where center-weighted metering comes in handy. Center-weighted metering evaluates the light in the middle of the frame and its surroundings and ignores the corners. Now you want to use this mode when you want the camera to prioritize the middle of the frame, which works great for close-up portraits and relatively large subjects that are in the middle of the frame. Spot metering is limited to a single metering circle in the center of the frame, and usually with an angle of view of somewhere between 12.5 degrees down to a 1-degree spot. This system allows you to take an exposure reading for a more defined target area. When your subject does not take up much of the space, using center-weighted metering modes would most likely result in a silhouette if the subject was backlit. Spot metering works great for backlit subjects like that. Another good example of using spot metering is when you're photographing the moon. Because the moon takes up only a very small portion of the frame and the sky is completely dark around it, it's best to use spot metering. That way, you're only looking at the light level coming from the moon and nothing else. Unfortunately, the process used to change camera metering modes not only varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, but also from model to model. The most effective way to find out how to change the metering mode on your camera model is to consult the user's guide that came with your camera.